Unit 3 LT5 notes factoring using the reverse box with a greatest common factor. So our steps for factoring using the reverse box is first we're going to factor out the greatest common factor. Then we're going to solve it just like we did before. We're going to set up our x, we're going to fill in our boxes, you're going to pull out your greatest common factors and then write out your factors. So here's a really important piece. When you're setting up your x, you're only going to be setting it up for what is left after you factor out the GCF. So you're going to take your new piece that you factored and use your x to set that up. So let's go ahead and look at number 1. We're going to factor out the trinomials. Okay, so when we do this, we have to pull out our greatest common factor of our numbers and our letters. So let's start with our numbers. I have a 2, a 6, and a 4. Well, I see that those are all even numbers, so I'm going to divide each of those pieces by 2. So I'm going to divide this piece by 2, this piece by 2, and this piece by 2. Okay, now that I've divided those by 2, I'm going to look and see, do they have a letter in common? Well, the first one has an x squared, the second one has an x, and the third one just doesn't have, it's just that 4, it doesn't have a letter. So I know 2 is my greatest common factor. So I'm going to go ahead and write that 2 on the outside, and then I'm going to divide the other pieces out. So 2x squared divided by 2 will give me a 1x squared, plus 6x divided by 2, that's going to give me a 3x, plus 4 divided by 2 will give me a 2. Okay, so here's the important piece that one slide was talking about. Now that we have this, we're going to make our x with just what's inside. So we're not going to go back to our original one. We're going to use this one right here. I'm going to go ahead and make my x. I'm going to multiply my a times my c. So 1 times 2 is 2. And my 3 goes on the bottom for my b. Okay, now I'm thinking of all my factors of 2. Well, I know 1 and 2 are the only factors of 2, and 1 plus 2 adds up to that 3, so I'm good there. So now I'm going to take the same piece that I have, and this is what I'm going to set up my box method with. So I'm going to make my box right here. Okay, and now I'm going to start from the beginning. So I have 1x squared, just like we always did before, goes in that box. And then I'm going to take these two right here and get my b values. So I have a 1x and a 2x. And then my c value is always what my c was before. And my c before was a 2. So I'm going to stick that 2 in right there. And now I'm going to find the factors, or the greatest common factors, of what's in those. Okay, so let's start with this one right here. I have a 1x and a 2x. Well, 1x and 2x, they both have a 1x in common. And then I'm going to move along, and let's do these ones right here. I have a 1x and a 2, and they both have a 1 in common. Now let's go up and down. So let's do these two first. I have a 1x squared and a 1x. Well, they both have a 1 and an x in them. And then finally, let's end with these ones right here. I have a 2x and a 2, and they both have just that 2 in common. Okay, so just like before, we're going to set these up 1x plus 2, and then what's going down the side? I have 1x plus 1. Well, here's the difference here. Okay, so when we started out, we first started and we factored out that greatest common factor. Okay, so we took that 2 out right away at the beginning, and then we put that right out front here. Well, Miss Fearing always says, if you go to the mall and your mom wants you to take your little sister to the mall, you guys go, you might split up while you're at the mall, you might do your own thing while you're there, but when you leave the mall, you better be sure that you bring your little sister home. So this is your little sister coming home with you, and she has to come out front, because if you come home and you don't have that little sister with you, your mom's going to be pretty upset. So that little sister is always going to come out front. So if you take a greatest common factor out at the beginning, that greatest common factor has to be before your factored pairs. Okay, so let's look at number 2. So I have a 3x squared, a 3x, and a negative 18. Okay, so I know, looking at all those, I know I can take a 3 out of each one of those. So I'm going to divide this piece by 3, this piece by 3, and this piece by 3. Okay, now I'm going to go ahead and rewrite. So my 3 is going to come out front. 3x squared divided by 3, 1x squared, plus 3x divided by 3 is just a 1x. And then a negative 18 divided by 3 is going to give me a negative 6. Okay, now that's what we're going to use for our x. So I'm going to go ahead and set up my x. And remember, we're using this inside piece for that x. So I'm going to take my a times my c, so negative 6 times 1 gives me a negative 6. And then I'm putting my b in the bottom. Okay, so I have a negative 6 and a 1. So I know one of my numbers has to be negative. So I'm going to go ahead and put a negative right there. And if you remember right, the negative, if the 1 is positive, the negative is going to go for the smaller number. Well, I know my factors of 6, 2 and 3 will make that 1. So my 2 is going to be negative 2 and my positive 3. So negative 2 plus 3 will give me that positive 1. Now that I have my x all set up, I can go ahead and make my box. Okay, and we're going to start from the beginning. So I'm going to start with that 1x squared, and that goes here, 1x squared. And then I'm going to do my b's with these two right here. So I have negative 2x and 3x. And then I'm going to go with my c, which my new c is negative 6. Okay, and then just like before, do those two. So 1x squared and 3x, they both have a 1x in common. Okay, let's move along and do these ones right here. So I have a negative 2x and a negative 6. Well, I see that they both have a negative on them. So right away I know there's a negative. Negative 2 and negative 6 be a negative 2. 1x squared and negative 2x, only one of them is negative, so we can't have a negative on this now. So now I know that they both have a 1 and just an x in them. And then finally, I have 3x and negative 6, and I know they both just have a 3 in them. Okay, so just like before, we're going to take it. I'm going to say 1x plus 3. Okay, and then down the side, 1x minus 2. And now before I decide I'm done, I have to look back up. Did I take my little sister to the mall with me? Well, I sure did. And since she's at the mall with me, I have to remember to bring her home. So Mom's not going to be happy if she doesn't come home with me. So I'm going to go ahead and bring her down here, and she's just coming out front. Okay, so let's look at this next one. So always look at your numbers first. I have a 2, a 7, and a 3. Okay, so a 2, a 7, and a 3, well, the only thing they have in common is a 1. And if I divided all of those by 1, I would still get a 2, a 7, and a 3. So I'm not going to divide them by 1. So let's look at the letters. I have an x to the third, an x to the second, and just an x. And if you remember, your greatest common factor is going to be something that your lowest exponent. So I'm looking x to the third, x to the second, and just an x. So my lowest exponent would be just that x. So I'm going to divide all of these. Divide this by x, divide this by x, and divide this by x. Okay, so just like before, my x is going to come out front. 2x to the third divided by x, that's going to be 2x squared. It's just going to be 1 less x. Plus 7x, so x to the second divided by x, that's just going to be, just give me a 7x, plus 3x divided by x, that's just going to give me a 3. Those x's cancel out, and then I'm going to close it. Now that I have that, I can go ahead and set up my x. Remember, we're using what is inside here to set my x up. Okay, so my a times my c, 7 times 3 is 6. And my 7 goes on bottom. Or sorry, not 7 times 3 is 6. 2 times 3 is 6, and my 7 goes on bottom. So I'm thinking my factors of 6, I have 1 is 6, and 2 and 3. Well, I know 1 and 6 makes that 7. I'm going to go ahead and redraw my box. And I'm going to start with what's inside to fill out my box. So first, I'm going to say 2x squared. And I'm replacing my b with a 1x and a 6x. And then I just need my new c down at the bottom. 2x and 6x, they both have a 2x in common. 1x and 3, they both have a 1 in common. 2x and 1x, they both have a 1x in common. And 3 and 6, they both have a 3 in common. So I'm rewriting the top 1x plus 3. And remember, these can go in any order. You can do the side first if you like. I just tend to go in the same order all the time. And then 2x plus 1. Okay, and then I'm going to double check. Did I bring anybody with me? Well, yep, got that x. So I have to leave with that x. So I'm going to go ahead and bring that x and stick that one out front. Okay, let's move on to number 4. I have x to the third plus 6x squared plus 8x. So I'm looking at those. They don't have a number in common, but they do have a letter in common. And that letter is an x. So my lowest exponent is an x. So I'm going to divide those by x. I'm going to put my x out front. X to the third divided by x is x squared plus 6x to the second divided by x is just going to be a 6x. Plus 8x divided by x, that's just going to give me an 8. Okay, now that I have that, I'm going to do my x with what's new inside here. Okay, so I'm going to take my a times my c. Remember, if there's no number in front, there's really that 1. So 8 times 1 is 8. And then my 6 goes right here. When I'm thinking of my factors of 8, I know that 2 and 4, 2 times 4 is 8, and 2 plus 4 is 6, so that works there. So now I'm going to draw my box. Okay, I'm going to start with what's inside my new. So I have an x squared here. This is getting replaced, or not getting replaced, but replacing that 6x. So I have a 2x and a 4x. And then my c value is going to go right there. Okay, now I'm going to find what's in common. So x squared and 4x, they both have an x in them. 2x and 8, they both have a 2 in common. X squared and 2x, they both have an x in common. And 4x and 8, they both have a 4 in common. Okay, so I'm going to rewrite those, x plus 4 and x plus 2. Then I'm looking up front. Did I bring anything with me? I sure did. I divided by an x, so that x has to come back at the end with me too. Okay, looking at number 5, I have a 6x squared plus 14x plus 4. When I look at those, I see all even numbers. So right away I know that I could divide by 2 because they're all even, and that would be my greatest common factor. So I'm going to divide this by 2, divide this by 2, and divide that by 2. Then I'm going to look at my letters, x squared, an x, and then just a 4. So I can't do anything because I don't have any letter on that 4. So my 2 is going to come out front, and then I'm going to divide out. 6x squared divided by 2, 3x squared, plus 14 divided by 2 would be 7x, plus 4 divided by 2 would be 2. Okay? I'm going to take that new piece and fill out my x. So I'm taking what's inside here to fill my x. So 3 times 2 is 6. And I have a 7 here. I know 1 and 6 multiply up to 6, but they add to 7, so I'm good there. So I'm going to draw that box like we've been doing. Okay, and then fill in what I have. So I'm going to start with a 3x squared. And I'm going to use this. And I have a 1x and a 6x. And finally, I'm going to end with my c value, which is a 2. And go through and pull out my greatest common factor, 3x and 6x. They both have a 3x. 1x and 2. They both just have a 1 in them. 3x and 1x. They both just have a 1 in them, or sorry, a 1 and an x in them. And then finally, 6 and 2, they both just have a 2. So I'm going to write out my factors. So I have a 1x plus 2, and then I have a 3x plus 1. Okay, I'm going to double check. Did I bring anybody with me? Yep, got those there and got this here. So if that is there, that means that that has to come out front right here. Okay, number 6, x squared plus 12x plus 20. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is look at my numbers. Well, really, there's a 1 right there. So I have a 1, a 12, and a 20. The only thing that I could divide those out by is 1. But if I divided all those by 1, I would get a 1, a 12, and a 20. So I'm not going to do that. Okay, so then let's look at our letters. I have an x squared, I have an x, and then I don't have anything on my 20. So you can't simplify this one anymore. You can't take a greatest common factor out. So when you can't take a greatest common factor out, you just go ahead and factor it. So 20 times 1 is 20. And then my b, my 12, goes on the bottom. So now I'm thinking of 20. I know 1 and 20. I know 2 and 10. Well, right away, I can see that 2 and 10 fits the bill, because 2 times 10 equals 20. 2 plus 10 equals that 12. So now that I have that, I can create my box. And then I'm going to use the original equation right now because I didn't change it at all. So I'm going to say 1x squared. And just like before, we're still using these to replace that. So I'm going to say 2x and 10x. And then I'm ending with my c, 20. And then we're going to go through it just like we did before. 1x squared and 10x, they both have in common a 1 and an x. 2x and 20, they both have a 2 in common. 1x squared and 2x, they both have a 1 and an x. And finally, 10x and 20, they both have a 10. So I'm going to find my factors, 1x plus 10, and then 1x plus 2, okay? Now I'm going to go up to the top. Did I divide anything out? Nope, I didn't. So I don't have to bring a little sister home with me this time because we didn't bring her to the mall with us. We got to go by ourselves that time. That was a fun night at the mall. Okay, number 7, I have 4x squared plus 24x plus 20. When I look at those, I see that I can take out a greatest common factor of a 4 right here, and right here. Looking at the letter, I don't have a letter, so my 4 comes out front. Then I have 4x squared divided by 4 gives me a 1x squared, plus 24x divided by 4 is a 6x. Plus 20 divided by 4 is a 5. So now I'm going to use that new piece right here. I'm going to create my new x. So x goes right here. That 5 times that 1 is 5, and this is a 6. So I know the factors of 5 are 1 and 5, and 1 plus 5 equals 6, so I'm good there. I'm going to draw my square. Okay, I'm going to start with that 1x squared, so 1x squared. I'm going to replace the 6x with the 1x and the 5x. So 1x and 5x. And I'm going to end with my new c value, which is 5. Okay, now that I have those, I'm going to see what do they have in common. What's the greatest common factor? So 1x squared and 5x, they both have a 1 and an x. And 1x and 5, they both just have a 1. A 1x squared and a 1x, they both have a 1x. And 5x and 5, oh man, I almost see that, right? 5x and 5, they both have a 5 in them. Okay, so I'm going to write out my factors. 1x plus 5 and 1x plus 1. And I'm going to check, did I divide anything out at the beginning? Yep, I sure did. I got, I don't know what color that is. Black. Fancy. Kind of gray, I guess. So I took a little sister with me. So since she's with me, she has to come home with me. So my 4 is going to go up front. Okay, number 8, 3x squared plus 5x plus 2. Okay, I have a 3, a 5, and a 2. I can't take anything out of those but a 1, so I'm not going to take anything out of that piece. And then 3x squared plus x plus 2. Well, there isn't anything, there's not a letter on all 3 of those. So this one is already simplified. We can't make it any smaller. So I'm going to just go ahead and set up my x. 3 times 2 is 6. And I have a 5 right here. I know 2 times 3 is 5. Or sorry, 2 times 3 is 6, but it adds to that 5. So I'm going to put those there. And now I can go ahead and just make my box with those ones, since I don't have to take greatest common factor out of it. Okay, so I'm going to start with my a value, 3x squared. I'm going to add my b values, which is 2x and 3x, and then end with my c value, which is that 2. See what goes together. 3x squared and 3x. Well, I see that they both have a 3 and an x, and 2x and 2. They both have a 2 in them. 3x squared and 2x. They both have a 1 and an x. And 3x and 2, they both just have a 1 in them. So 3x and 2 just have that 1. Okay, so I'm going to go 1x plus 1 and 3x plus 2. Okay, I'm going to look. Is there anything that we divided out in the beginning? Did we find a greatest factor first? Nope, we sure didn't. So that is our final answer right there. You are ready to move on to LT homework for LT5.